So I'd like to welcome you to the Gold Star Medical Business Services webinar today on the content of understanding how to handle collections for extremity adjusting, specifically with your Medicare and your cash patients. Now, I know that your organization, American Hand and Foot Clinics, is an amazing organization that brings together chiropractors who are interested in specializing in hand and foot adjusting. And with that, it brings a number of challenges from a coding and billing standpoint, and also from a revenue stream standpoint. And I would certainly love to come back and visit with you all about different types of revenue streams that you may be able to introduce into your office. That would be a great ancillary service to what you specialize in, and all of that. But really, it sounded to me from Dr. Fenell that there was a real need to know more about the coding and billing and collections aspect of a clinic such as this, and a clinic model such as this, specifically with respect to the Medicare and cash pay patients. And so I really wanted to focus on this today. Again, we're going to try to get through the content in about 50 minutes. And have about a 10-minute Q&A at the end of the session. Before we get started, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just tell you a little bit about myself. I have been involved in the chiropractic field since 1982. I started out as a CA working for a chiropractor when I was in college, working front desk. And then over the years, I began to work in various positions throughout chiropractic clinics. Once you get a job as a CA, it kind of seems like no matter where you move to, if you apply to a chiropractor's office, they're very excited to have somebody with experience. So I was never out of work. And so I continued to work in the chiropractic field through the years. And in 1994, I moved to San Angelo, Texas, which is where I still reside. So I've been here now 23 years, I guess. Hard to believe, but I began to work with a chiropractic office as a clinic director, and we basically started up. I managed his clinic, which was a very large clinic, and also we set up satellite clinics. So together, this doctor and I set up 4 satellite clinics together. In 1999, I had a little surprise come into my life, and he's 18 now. When I had my son, it became really impossible for me to continue working at Lone Star Chiropractic because of the amount of traveling that was involved. And so we were, at that time, members of a practice management group called CATS Management. Some of you may be familiar with that. In about 2005, Dr. Katz sold the company to his partner, and he changed the name to Integrity Management. And so I was a senior consultant with Integrity Management for 10 years. We started my company, Gold Star Medical, during that time to give my husband, who was at that time disabled, a part-time job, basically, so that he could start doing medical billing from home. And I basically taught him how to be an insurance CA, and taught him the insurance billing and coding aspect of things, and did great. In 2009, my husband passed away, and when he did, I took over Gold Star Medical full-time. We now service over 60 offices doing medical billing for chiropractors and medical doctors. We also do billing consulting, compliance auditing, and clinic efficiency auditing services. Through this period of time, I also received some certifications. I am an MCSP, which is a certified medical compliance specialist with an additional chiropractic specialization in chiropractic medical compliance. I'm also a CMC, a certified medical coder, and a certified medical office manager. And I serve on a faculty at this point of the Practice Management Institute, which is an organization that provides coding, billing, and compliance education for medical doctors. And so I do a lot of work with medical doctors as well as chiropractors. It gives me an interesting perspective on things when I talk to chiropractors, having that medical background and that medical experience. Personally, I'm a sports mom of 3 teenagers, 2 of them who have just graduated high school and are starting college. 2 other adult children. I'm a grandma. I'm a certified yoga instructor, and I love playing pickleball. So that's me in a nutshell. Just wanted to kind of let you know who your instructor was today and what kind of background I bring to you. But really what we need to do is we need to talk about the whole aspect of coding and billing in a chiropractic offices that specializes in hand and foot work. Now, most of you, this is going to be a little bit of review, but I can never assume that somebody may be on this call that is just starting their job as a CA and they've been working less than a week. You know, who knows? And so I'd like to go over just a little bit of background on sort of the meat of chiropractic coding. Obviously, the 3 main codes that are used in the majority of chiropractic offices are the chiropractic manipulative treatment codes. And when we talk about codes, we're talking about billing codes. These are codes that are used to translate onto a claim for payment or reimbursement of services to insurance companies or to Medicare. And everything is done in code. So when you submit a claim to an insurance company, you're not writing out in a narrative format what you did. You're actually creating codes for services, codes for diagnoses, modifiers, and so on and so forth that translate onto a claim form and tell an insurance carrier in code what it is you've done. And these CPT codes, which are the codes that represent charges and services, the 3 main codes for in the chiropractic profession for spinal manipulation are 98940, 98941, and 98942. And these represent spinal manipulations dependent on the number of regions of the spine that you are treating. Not that you're manipulating, but that you are treating for a medically necessary condition. So this is an issue sometimes that doctors have a little bit of a misunderstanding on. They think, well, you know, if I'm a full spine adjuster and like I'm an activator doctor and I do my activator treatment on every single vertebra of the spine, I can code a 5-region manipulation. Well, that's not true. The bottom line is that all claims are paid based on medical necessity, and so in order for you to code a 5-region manipulation, for example, you would need to have diagnosis codes that would create medical necessity in all 5 of those regions in order for that 5-region manipulation to be justified to the insurance company. Now, the spinal regions I've shown you are as follows. You have cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and pelvic. And the thoracic does include the costovertebral and costotransverse joints. So, and on the cervical, it does include the atlanto-occipital joint. And the reason why I mention that is because sometimes doctors who code for extremities are actually, if they are manipulating the costovertebral joint in the thoracic spine, coded as an extraspinal adjustment, and that's not correct. That is actually considered a spinal region. So that is something as an extremity adjuster that you do need to be aware of, is which joints in the cervical and thoracic area are considered actually extraspinal and which are not. The extraspinal manipulation code, which of course is a big staple for the extremity clinics and the hand and foot clinics, is the 98943 code. And of course, this is the one that I'm sure most of you are concerned about as far as how to get reimbursed correctly from the insurance company. And the regions, there are 5 regions of the spine that consist of a spinal manipulation, but there are 5 extraspinal regions, and those regions are the head, including the TMJ, but excluding atlanto-occipital, the lower extremities, the upper extremities, the rib cage, and that excludes costotransverse and the costovertebral joints and the abdomen. So you have 5 extraspinal regions the same way you have 5 spinal regions. Now, by the CPT professional coding book, when you look at the code for a 98943, you need to understand that that code represents an encounter for an extraspinal manipulation to 1 or more regions. So this is an important coding tip. You cannot bill out multiple 98943 codes in one encounter. So in other words, you can't bill out a 98943 for the right foot and one for the left foot. If you manipulate 5 different extremity areas in one encounter, you're only going to be able to bill out for one 98943 code, no matter how many extremities you manipulate in an encounter. So that's a coding tip that you do need to be aware of in the type of clinics that that most of you are listening to me and have specialized in. Now, for diagnosis coding for extremities, one of the main things that I see personally that cause denials in extremity coding for billing purposes is not using extremity diagnosis codes to point to an extremity adjustment. And it's a very simple, you would think that that's very simple, but it actually isn't. And so I'm just pointing out here. Now, obviously, if you go to the ICD-10 code book or you go to a chiropractic ICD-10 code book, you're going to find many more extremity diagnosis codes that are available to you. But these are really the more common ones that at least as a medical billing company, when we are dealing with doctors who do a good bit of extremity adjusting, these are the codes that the most common codes we see: the joint pain, stiffness of joint, other specified joint disorders, and the osteoarthritis codes. And so these are the 4 big ones that most extremity adjusters will use as their extremity codes. But many times what we find is that when we're billing for clients, we'll run a pre-billing report and we see a 98943 on the claim, and we're looking for a diagnosis code that even points to an extremity, and there's not one there. And then we have to go back before we bill out that claim to make sure that the doctor is providing us with a code that would apply to that extremity adjustment. So one of the things that you do need to be aware of in extremity adjusting too is that laterality does come into play in a big way. So for those of you who are adjusting, let's say both the left and the right hand, you must have codes that will point to both sides of the body because, and obviously your documentation has to match that. So if you are adjusting the right side and you're adjusting the left hand, you would document that in your notes, but then you would also have diagnosis codes to relate to that documentation. So one of the things that you're going to see if you're a CA and you're listening and your doctor is routinely getting denied for extremity codes, it may be that you're not diagnosing to the highest level of specificity and you're only coding, for example, the M25.5, or you're doing the M25.540, which is an unspecified side. So you want to be sure that you are coding to the highest level of specificity. And then, of course, the M25, the M25.6 relates to codes for the stiffness of joint. And when I have the XX after the diagnosis here under the M25.6 and 8 and so on and so forth, what that means is that there are additional digits that need to be entered to bring more specificity to that code. So, a couple of coding tips. Almost all hand and foot diagnosis codes are 6 digits long due to the necessity of indicating laterality. So if you're typically using codes that are less than 6 digits, you really want to look at them. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't 5-digit codes or even 4-digit codes, but because of laterality, because you're dealing with pairs, hands and feet, and so on and so forth, you need to make sure that shoulders and so on and so forth. If you have right side, left side, you must indicate that. And anytime you bill a 98943, you have to show a relatable diagnosis code on the claim, and most importantly, pinpoint that code to the service line. And I'm actually going to show you an example of this here in a second. Make sure also that your documentation clearly describes the extremity adjustment, the regions that you adjusted, the laterality, and that you have a diagnostic timeline for that adjustment. Now, what do I mean by that? What I see in extremity adjusting, and one of the reasons why I see denials in extremity adjusting, is the code will be billed out to an insurance carrier, and an insurance carrier flags that for additional information. And so the documentation is sent, and the documentation shows that the extremity was adjusted, but then there's no supporting documentation timeline to show why it was adjusted. And you know what we hear a lot is a patient comes into the clinic and they're receiving a spinal adjustment. Now, this may not be the case so much with a hand and foot clinic, but they're receiving a spinal adjustment, and it's, oh, by the way, doc, I was working in the garden, and I was using my trowel, and I smashed my trowel into a rock, and I really jammed my wrist. You think you could take a look at it? And the doctor does, and it's like, oh yeah, let me adjust that. And so then they basically adjust the wrist, code for it. But then when the documentation comes in, it doesn't show any timeline of having an exam done. There was no documentation that there was an examination done of the wrist. There was no documentation that there was an x-ray maybe done to rule out a fracture. There was no treatment plan. There's nothing. It's just all of a sudden there's this adjustment that pops up for an extremity, and that is going to be a red flag to an insurance company. So make sure that if you're going to be coding for hand and foot or for extremities, that you are showing that you've examined the area and that you've created some kind of a treatment plan with treatment goals, and are updating periodically the progress of that patient. And that's, that goes for the spine as well as extraspinal. So let me just show you an example. Oh, sorry. Let me go back. Hopefully I might need to do it this way. Yeah, here we go. I can't do it off the slide, but I can do it off of the. Okay, so here is an example of a paper claim form. And of course, any insurance claim that is filed is going to be filed either electronically or by paper, but even electronic claims use the same box references that paper claims do. So, if you have a claim denial on an electronic claim, they may say that box 31 was not filled out correctly, or box 24J is missing a rendering provider. And what they're referencing is they're referencing the box numbers on a standard paper CMS 1500 claim form. And where we put our diagnosis codes on a claim form is right here in box 21. And I'm going to kind of zoom in a little here to show you what box 21. So box 21 basically says diagnosis or nature of illness or injury, and then it says very specifically relate A through L, which you see A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on and so forth. So there's a place for you to put up to 12 diagnosis codes on a claim. And so it says relate A through L to service line below, and then 24E. So here's box 24, okay, and box 24E basically says diagnosis pointers. So what you would do is, let's say you saw a patient and you did a 1 to 2 region spinal manipulation and then an extra spinal manipulation. As you see, what we did was in box 24E, we related the spinal manipulation to A and C, and A and C basically are, let me unzoom this a little bit if I can. Basically, A was sciatica on the right side, and C was spinal instability of the lumbosacral region, okay, which definitely relates to a spinal adjustment. But the extraspinal code, which was right in the middle, is actually in position B. And so you would only put the diagnosis code relating to that extremity in the diagnosis pointer box in box 24. What we find is that there are a lot of software programs out there, Eclipse, ChiroTouch, and other programs that default 4 diagnosis codes to every claim line. So if you don't specifically go in and pinpoint that diagnosis, the diagnosis code, what it might look like on a claim is 98943 ABC and 98940 ABC. Well, if you do that, the 98940 is in danger of being denied because you're relating an extraspinal diagnosis to a spinal manipulation, and on this one, you're on the 98943, you're relating a spinal diagnosis to an extraspinal adjustment. And this is one of the most common reasons you see extraspinal and spinal adjustments being denied, because diagnosis codes aren't being correctly pinpointed. And so I did want to make you aware of that and show that to you. So let's talk about, how to effectively bill for a chiropractic claim. Now, successful billing is accomplished when 3 things are firmly in place. Number 1 is a good code with the appropriate modifier, a diagnosis code to support the level of service that you are performing, and documentation to support both the CPT or HCPT code and the diagnosis code. Now, how we should bill is the documentation should be the foundation of any of any claim, okay? Making sure, because everything should be based and driven from the documentation, not from the code. So the way it should be is, if you were, for example, if you were a medical doctor, you would send your note to billing, and then the biller and the coder would look at your note, and from that note, they would determine what the diagnosis is. They would code it for you. They would tell you, based on what you're writing in your narrative or in your SOAP note, here's what the diagnosis should be. And sometimes the medical doctors will do this as well. But everything is driven from the documentation, and they'll look at the narrative and look at the service that was performed or the procedure that was performed and code a CPT code or a group of CPT codes. And so everything is driven by the documentation. Now, normally what we do in chiropractic, unfortunately, is upside down. And you see we have the upside down triangle here on the right is, okay, we put a CPT code in, and then we ask the question, well, what diagnosis do I need to get this paid? Well, that's not the right thinking. And what do I need to have as far as documentation? You need to flip it around, because, if you put a triangle on its point, what's going to happen? It's just going to topple over. So if you don't have the documentation to support the CPT code and the diagnosis code, can you file that claim without it? You can, but in the event of an audit, you're going to find that many of those services that were paid for without incident will be taken back. And if an insurance carrier feels that this was intentionally done, that you knew better and you should have the supporting documentation to justify the billing for those claims, then what you're going to find is they may penalize you further with civil money penalties. And, if it is blatant fraud, it could be a criminal violation. Now, I'm not going to sit here and scare everybody, but we do have to be very, very mindful that documentation is the foundation of a successful claim, not the CPT code or the diagnosis code. So doctors, please be aware of that. And staff members, if you're doing billing, you need to be asking your doctor, do you have signed notes, for example, to be able to, if we were called on to send notes with the claim, would that documentation be available and be ready? Because technically you're not supposed to send a claim out without a note, without a completed note. Because in the eyes of an insurance carrier, if you send out a claim and you don't have a note to accompany it, then it didn't happen. Then the service and the encounter did not happen. And that's how an insurance company considers that. Now, for Medicare, let's get into that. As we know, if you know anything about Medicare and chiropractic, and this is the way it's been since I started working in the chiropractic field, Medicare only covers spinal manipulation and only to correct a subluxation, period. And that's the way it's been forever with Medicare. Medicare does not cover 98943. Since Medicare Advantage plans, which are the Medicare replacement plans now, and they are becoming more and more prevalent, they have to follow the Medicare guidelines. So most Medicare Advantage plans will also not cover 98943. So essentially 98943 is a non-covered service when it comes to Medicare. Now, one of the things that we see, depending on the Medicare carrier, if a 98943 is actually present on a Medicare claim, Medicare denies the entire claim. So even if you did bill a spinal manipulation and an extra spinal, if the extra spinal manipulation is even present on the claim, or if there is an extra spinal diagnosis code on the claim that's kind of left there by accident, Medicare may deny the whole claim, including the spinal adjustment. They would just deny it outright. One of the things that, it still kind of surprises me, so I have to talk about this, that many chiropractors don't know about, is that Medicare will only pay for claims that have diagnosis codes on them that are approved by Medicare. And Medicare has every Medicare carrier has a document that has a list of approved diagnosis codes. And these diagnosis codes are found on your LCD. Medicare does not have approved diagnosis codes for extremities. Now, they do have extremity diagnosis codes that are on the LCD, but they still do not cover 98943. LCD stands for Local Coverage Determination, and this is a document that is published by every local Medicare carrier, and it provides a guidebook for coding, billing, and documentation by specialty. And chiropractic has an LCD for, with every Medicare carrier. It lists, the cool thing about the LCD is that it lists all of the CPT codes for each specialty that are approved for billing to Medicare, and it gives you a list of all the approved diagnosis codes. So there's no guesswork involved. As long as you have the LCD, you should be able to look up the diagnosis code in the LCD, and if you want to put it on the claim, you have to make sure that it is listed in your LCD. And also it gives guidelines on how to document both initial and subsequent services for Medicare payment. So the LCD is a great reference source for you. To get an LCD, this is just a screenshot that I took of the Novitas Solutions Medicare Part B website, which is the website for Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and some Pennsylvania, and there's some other carriers that use Novitas, Arkansas, Colorado, Louisiana, and so on and so forth, that use Novitas as their Medicare carrier. In other words, if you're practicing in Oklahoma, you're going to submit your Medicare claims to Novitas Solutions. And this is the home page. If you look on the home page and go down the left side, right towards the bottom, there's a section that says Medical Policy /LCDs. From there, if you open it up, it pops down with a drop down that says Search Policy, LCDs, NCDs, and Articles. If you go to the next page and you can search by name. So here is the LCD for chiropractic. You would select chiropractic services, and then your LCD would pop up and it would give you your coding information. And as you can see, the codes that are listed for billing that are payable by Medicare are the spinal manipulation codes, and you'll notice that the extra spinal code is not on there. And some of the LCDs, interestingly enough, have 98943 listed, but then immediately below it, it says 98943 is not payable by Medicare. The other thing it will do is give you your list of diagnosis codes. So your next page, you'll have a list of primary diagnosis codes. So the LCD will tell you that these primary diagnosis codes are the only codes that will be approved in box 21A. That is your primary diagnosis. And then from there, it gives you, broken down into 4 more groups, a list of secondary diagnosis codes. Now, the secondary diagnosis codes, you'll notice that the primary diagnosis codes give you what? They give you all of the regions of the spine: the head, cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and pelvic. And then you have, and basically those are the only regions that would be payable by Medicare if you're going to manipulate. And these are your segmental dysfunctions. These are your subluxation codes, essentially. The secondary diagnosis codes, when you're using them for spinal manipulation, would need to relate to your primary diagnosis. So, for example, if your primary diagnosis is an M99.01, which is segmental dysfunction of the cervical region, then the second diagnosis code you would choose would be a code that would relate to the cervical region, such as G44.209, tension type headache, unspecified. If you put a M99.01 in as the primary diagnosis code, but then related M54.07, paniculitis affecting regions of the neck and back, lumbosacral region, that wouldn't be a match and your claim might be denied. So you do need to make sure that you are using the correct diagnosis sequencing on your Medicare claims, and of course this also applies to commercial claims. Interestingly enough, your LCD also gives you coverage guidelines, and a lot of doctors don't know this. You know, they don't realize that the LCD actually will tell you, based on the diagnosis code you use, how many visits you can expect Medicare to approve. And I always get that question, and so I always guide doctors to the LCD. So when you do eventually pull up your LCD for Medicare, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to look at the different groups of diagnosis codes and what diagnosis codes are contained in those groups, and realize that based on the second diagnosis code you use on a Medicare claim, this is where you're going to receive the indicator of how many visits you could expect Medicare to pay before they begin to deny the claim or begin to question the validity of that diagnosis. So, for example, you see that for Group D diagnoses, that's 30 chiropractic manipulation treatments. And so, you know, if you were to go to, I'm not going to take you there now because of time, but if you were to go to the LCD for Group 4, this is where you would find your spinal degeneration codes, like your cervical disc degeneration or your cervical disc displacement codes, and so on and so forth. Sciatica is also in Group 4. So, you know, obviously, if all you're using are pain codes, the pain codes are all going to be in Group A. And, you know, we have doctors who are getting audited by Medicare and getting, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars of claims taken back because they use subluxation pain, subluxation pain, subluxation pain for their 3 regions of the spine. So it's like cervical subluxation, cervicalgia, thoracic subluxation, dorsalgia, and then lumbar subluxation, lumbago. And then they bill Medicare for 30 visits. If Medicare does a retrospective audit on you, that money is coming back because typically they only pay for up to 12, if that, okay? And so these are things that you need to be aware of that you can actually see very clearly outlined in your LCD. Now, the other thing that we need to make sure we know how to do is the proper use of the ABN or the Advanced Beneficiary Notice. Now, there is a lot of confusion with respect to ABNs. And especially with chiropractic, because, you know, here's the deal with an ABN. The ABN is designed to notify a Medicare patient, number 1, in advance, number 2, for covered Medicare services that Medicare may not pay for that service, okay? So when I go to audit doctors' offices and I look at their ABNs, they have like everything, the kitchen sink on the ABN. They have spinal manipulations and extra spinal manipulations and therapies and exams and I mean basically everything. And a true mandatory ABN should only relate to these three codes that you see on your screen, 98940, 98941, and 98942, because these are the only services that Medicare covers. All right? ABNs are not required for any other services, including extraspinal adjustments. Now, with that said, you can have patients sign a voluntary ABN for other non-covered services, and if you place a non-covered service on a Medicare claim, which some patients may ask you to do to try to get a determination from a secondary carrier or whatever the case might be, you would need to use the correct modifier indicating that you have had the patient sign a voluntary ABN, which is the GX modifier. Now, I always get a question as to when you should fill out an ABN and at what point. So basically, coming straight from Medicare, they say that an ABN is a written notice you must issue to a fee-for-service beneficiary, and ABNs only apply to Medicare Part B, not Medicare Advantage. That are usually covered by Medicare but are not expected to be paid in a specific instance for certain reasons, such as lack of medical necessity. So basically, there are three events that prompt the issuance of an ABN. One is initiation of care, the other is a reduction in care, and then the third would be a termination of active care. So in these three instances, you might have a patient sign an ABN. So initially, when they first begin care for spinal manipulations, you would have them sign an ABN to let them know that at some point Medicare may deem that service not medically necessary. If you are treating a Medicare patient and you're 30 days in and now you're doing a re-exam and you've decided to release the patient to maintenance, you may want to have them do an ABN if you haven't already done one, to let them know that Medicare does not cover maintenance and have them make their choice as to what they want to have happen, or if their care is terminated. So these are the three events that would prompt the issuance of an ABN. And if you look at this screen, you'll see the white boxes. This is basically copied and pasted directly from the Medicare guidebook on how to fill out an ABN. So this isn't my opinion. This isn't some practice management group's opinion on how to do an ABN, because I hear a lot of different advisories on how often you should do an ABN. For me, I prefer to follow the Medicare guidelines, and so I take it straight from the horse's mouth. This is exactly what Medicare tells you to do with reference to an ABN and when to do it. A voluntary ABN would be used for exams, x-rays, extremity manipulations, passive modalities, basically anything that you would do in a chiropractic office that Medicare Part B would not cover. In a voluntary ABN, patients are not required to make any option as to whether they want the service, whether they want Medicare billed. It is simply informational in nature, and it is simply a courtesy to let the patient know that they have a financial liability to you for these non-covered services, okay? So if you do decide to bill Medicare, or the patient asks, well, could you go ahead and bill Medicare just to make sure that, you know, Medicare doesn't pay or my secondary doesn't pay, and you go ahead and do that, make sure you amend the claim with modifiers GY and GX on all of the non-covered services if you're using a voluntary ABN. Now, this is what the ABN looks like. It's available in Spanish and English, and it is available on the Medicare website. This is an example of how a mandatory ABN would look, and I'm not going to go into it in tremendous detail because I can already see that we're at 1:40 now. We've got about 10 minutes left before we go into the Q&A. But essentially, you'll notice that this mandatory ABN, the only codes that you would see on this were the spinal manipulation codes, okay, and the Voluntary ABN would then show everything else. And you'll notice if I go back up to the mandatory ABN essentially on the reason Medicare may not pay is that Medicare does not cover maintenance treatments or supportive care. The cost range between you would basically give them a range of the 98940 through the 98943 visit. And then at that point, the patient, for a mandatory ABN, must make an option as to what they want to have done. And if they choose option 1, that means that you would continue billing Medicare for those spinal manipulation codes, but you would then, at the point that you're moving the patient into maintenance, you would append it with a GA modifier, and the GA modifier lets Medicare know that you have an ABN on file. If they choose option 2, at that point you can discontinue billing Medicare and just charge the patient as a cash patient for the spinal manipulations. Option 3 is the patient telling you that if Medicare doesn't pay, I do not want the services. And then at that point you would release them. You would let them know that if they do re-present with a condition that may be considered active care or acute treatment or chronic treatment, then you would certainly entertain treating them again under active care. The voluntary ABN, you can see you would list all of the services that you would perform, the relative values for those services, and of course you would also include extra spinal manipulation on the voluntary ABN. So, this is just a little quiz that you can self-audit yourself. I'm not going to go through it with you here, but by all means, I have sent Dr. Fenell the handouts to this class. So you should you reach out to him if he has not already sent them to you. You can reach out to him and go ahead and get the notes for this class and take this little self-audit quiz. Now, Dr. Fenell did have a very pertinent and fairly serious question about Medicare enrollment for chiropractors who have cash-based clinics, who have hand and foot clinics, who don't do a lot or any spinal manipulation. And the question was, can we opt out of Medicare? We basically only see Medicare patients referred by other chiropractors. The other chiropractor handles their spinal manipulation, and all we do is handle the extra spinal manipulations and so on and so forth. And I'm just going to give you the real simple and straightforward answer to this. Doctors of chiropractic, regardless of what you do, are not allowed to opt out of Medicare. There is a prohibition under Medicare and under the Social Security Act that prohibit doctors of chiropractic from opting out of Medicare. Now what that means is you have two choices. You may enroll if you want to treat a Medicare patient for anything, regardless of whether this is a spinal manipulation or an extra spinal manipulation. You should be enrolled in Medicare and have a Medicare number. All right, and it hardly seems fair, and I know, but this is based on the Social Security Act, so this is law. So you have two choices. You can enroll in Medicare as a participating provider, which means you accept assignment, or as a non-participating provider, which means you do not accept assignment. But basically, the bottom line is a DC without a Medicare enrollment or active PTAN number must not treat a Medicare patient at all, but refer them out. So if you're listening to this and you've never bothered enrolling in Medicare because you don't treat spinal manipulations, you are out of compliance and you're actually in violation of the law. If Medicare were to find out that you were treating a patient, you're looking at a $30,000 per claim line violation. Okay, it's just not worth it. And in all honesty, nowadays, and basically this is where it comes from, and I wanted to show you the resource in Medicare that tells you that the providers who are not eligible to opt out of Medicare, and chiropractors are at the top of the list: anesthesiologist assistant, speech language pathologists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, And then any other specialty not eligible to enroll in Medicare, which, but chiropractors are at the top of the list of not eligible to opt out of Medicare. So you either are a provider, a participating provider, a non-participating provider, or if a Medicare patient walks through your door, you must refer them back out. Okay? Now, some doctors of chiropractic I'm seeing are getting into trouble for trying to manipulate the opt-out provision, and the OIG has stepped up investigations into chiropractors who avoid billing Medicare by, here are some of the things that I've seen and I've heard, and I've seen doctors getting in big trouble for this. They say that they only treat maintenance patients. Well, we don't treat any active spines. It's all maintenance patients. So the only thing they do is bill the code S8990, which is not covered by Medicare, and then they think, well, I'm okay. I never manipulate spines, only extremities. I bill out 97140, which is a joint mobilization code, in place of 98940, 41, or 42, because it's a non-covered service, and so I don't have to be enrolled in Medicare. I only do rehab and massage codes on Medicare patients. We don't manipulate spines. Or I'm an all-cash practice and I have a flat fee for manipulation and therapy. Well, the bottom line is if you're manipulating or you're treating a Medicare patient, you must be enrolled. Now, what should you do about this? Go ahead and enroll in Medicare. Honestly, it's an easy process. You can do it online. It takes about an hour to do. And the main thing to consider is whether you want to participate or not participate. Now, for those of you who are, heavy into cash or hand and foot clinics, what we see is that even all cash practices, at the very least, enroll in Medicare. Because consider this. What if you are in practice for 20 years and you have a wonderful, hand and foot clinic and you do primarily extremity adjusting, but now all of a sudden your patients are aging into Medicare and they've been your patients for years, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Now all of a sudden you have to refer them out because you're not enrolled in Medicare. It just doesn't make sense. And honestly, it's an easy application process, probably one of the easiest ones to do nowadays online. What you can do is enroll as a non-participating provider. So basically what that means is that if you do adjust a spine, you would bill Medicare for those spinal adjustments, but you would collect the fee up front from the patient, not accept assignment, and Medicare would reimburse the patient. And then you could also adjust anything else you want, all the extremities. You could do your rehab codes, you could do your exams, you can do your x-rays. You're not required to bill Medicare for those, but you are required to be enrolled. And so my recommendation for a clinic such as yours would probably be to consider just enrolling, but as a non-participating provider. And then the only thing that you would be required to do would be to bill for the spinal manipulation codes for your patients under active care. And that keeps you within the legalities of the law. You wouldn't be violating the Social Security Act. You wouldn't be violating Medicare rules of inducement, and so on and so forth. So we are right at the end of our time. It's 10 minutes until 2, and I know I have until 2 o'clock. So let's entertain the questions. Now, Dr. Fenell, I'm going to unmute everybody. So hopefully we've got everybody unmuted now. Dr. Fenell, can just say something so I know that you can hear me?
I can hear you, Lisa.
Okay, perfect. So I guess I have...
This is perfect, by the way.
Good. I guess I have everybody unmuted. So Dr. Fenell, you had a list of questions that you sent me. I don't have those in front of me unless I pull them up and pull the slide off. But I did want to leave this up for a little bit. So I do have a couple of questions from the chat box. So I have, if you're par and wish to go non-par, how would you notify Medicare of your decision to change? That's a great question. And as a matter of fact, there is a period at the end of each calendar year in which you are eligible to disenroll as a participating provider. So that time is coming up this fall. I don't have the exact dates. I believe it's between the it's either the 1st of October or the 1st of November and the 15th of December of every year is when a doctor can change their election from going from a participating to a non-participating provider. And so if that is something, if like right now you're participating in Medicare and you want to go non-par, then this would be a great time to do that. And you would actually, you would have to send a letter on your letterhead to your Medicare fiscal intermediary carrier, letting them know, and there's actually a format to that. So if that is something any of you are interested in doing, contact me and I'll be happy to give you more details about that. I'll also make a note to look for the documentation on what you need to do, and I can send it to Dr. Fenell, and Dr. Fenell, you can pass that on to everybody in your organization.
Perfect. And we are sending out an email with the downloadable slides as well, too. They'll be receiving that around 3 or 3:10 today.
Fantastic.
Eastern time.
So, Dr. Fenell, what were the other questions that were on that that sheet that you sent me last night?
Yeah, so first is, have there been any recent changes, and you probably covered this, to the ABN process or procedures from what used to be? Have there been new revisions to the ABN, or maybe you covered that today as far as it's the most current but haven't discussed any previous?
No, there really have not been any revisions to the ABN form itself. The ABN form is still, current. The thing is when the voluntary ABN became, there used to be, before the voluntary ABN, there used to be a form called Notice of Exclusion of Medicare Benefits, or NEMB, and that was used in place of the voluntary ABN. Well, Medicare did away with that, and then basically just said that you use the current ABN form to produce a voluntary ABN. Okay, and so essentially what you're doing is you're having two exactly the same forms that have different information on it. Okay, let me just say, if there's anybody on the call right now that has like background music or anything going on, or you're making phone calls, just go ahead and mute yourself so that we don't have a lot of background noise. But yeah, so really and truly, it's not that there's anything new about the ABN. It's just that I see so many doctors who don't know how to fill out the ABN correctly. And like I said, they have everything on the ABN: spinal manipulation, extra spinal manipulation, therapies, and really and truly, the ABN needs to be broken down into the covered services and the non-covered services. And of course, for Medicare, the covered services are just the 3 spinal manipulation codes. So you have an ABN for that, and then you have an ABN for everything else.
Right. Perfect. Thank you. Next question. A client asked this, kind of a variant of this here, but I kind of expounded on it because I thought we could give it a little bit more detail. I wish that I could opt out of Medicare, but I realize I cannot, and as a result, I do treat Medicare patients and bill for spinal care to Medicare, but we see a lot of Medicare patients for feet and hands. I also have several chiropractors in my community that send me hand and foot patients. They send me cash patients, insurance patients, and Medicare patients. We always refer them back to the referring doctor so we don't steal patients from that referring doctor. It's a courtesy to those doctors who refer. When patients come into me who have Medicare, and they come in organically, like they walk in from our sign or off the street, can we choose to treat them for their hand or foot condition? That's the reason they came in. But then if they have spinal needs or issues, recommend one of the other chiropractors who are participating with Medicare for their spine condition, almost building that provider up as the best choice for spinal care and being a good doctor and refer them to that doctor instead of doing the Medicare billing and treating the spine ourselves. Of course, we would still treat them if they said, no, we want to come here for everything. But are we allowed to refer those out so as to minimize the number of Medicare patients we see?
Yes, you could. You could certainly refer them out. Now, when I hear that, I have to ask, and maybe speak it to that individual doctor as to the rationale for them not wanting to treat the spine. Possibly they're not comfortable adjusting the spine. They don't feel that they have the skill set. But, from a business standpoint, I would never do that. I mean, and basically, the way Medicare is going now, is that, once you've gotten a patient through a course of active care, which is anywhere from 12 to 30 visits, spinal visits, at that point, they're considered to be a maintenance patient. And now you could be treating the spine and not having to bill Medicare. So really, the amount of Medicare billing that you would have to do on any Medicare patient, whether it's a spinal, if they're spinal, is fairly minimal. And so to me, unless it's a technique issue or a philosophical issue that you just don't want to deal with spines, to me it doesn't make good business sense, because what you do is, if you have a hand and foot clinic, that's your main revenue stream, and everything else is ancillary service. So in that point, your spinal manipulation becomes an ancillary service. Your rehab becomes ancillary. Reflexology, which is basically trigger point for feet, become ancillary. And these are all additional revenue streams that you can bring to your clinic. So I don't know. I mean, my answer is that yes, you can refer it out, but I'm not sure why you would want to. But that's just.
I believe it was just because they wish they could opt out, but they can't. But they still wanted to see them for extremity care, so that's why if they opted out, they would have to refer them, and they couldn't treat their extremities or adjust their hands or feet. So this would maybe give them the next best thing, almost like they could still not treat spine on the majority of them, but treat hands on feet and on all of them who needed hand and foot care. They refer their spines out to those doctors who are already referring to them.
Yeah, I mean, if you have doctors that are referring, hand and foot patients to you, then you're kind of off the hook for the spinal adjustments, because they're taking care of it and you don't want to deal with it anyway. But if you have that organic patient, once you're enrolled in Medicare, you might as well bill it. It's no harder than billing, anything else. It's no harder than billing commercial insurance. And so, it's just a different carrier and a different modifier. Sure. And so, it's not rocket science to bill Medicare for the spinal adjustment. So, why not keep that revenue stream in your office? But I know that doctors have had a really hard time with Medicare billing, and, feeling like, they're going to get audited or whatever. And generally, most of the problems that I see with Medicare and chiropractors or even medical doctors have to do with just having, not having an understanding of the LCD, of the basic rules for billing. Not using the correct modifiers, over-treating, that type of thing. But it's really outlined very clearly in the LCDs as far as the treatment parameters. So, anyway, but yeah, I guess the simple answer is, if they want to refer them out for all spinal work, they certainly can do that. But they have to be enrolled in Medicare.
Perfect.
The bottom line is you have to be enrolled. You cannot. You have to be enrolled. You cannot just be, well, I've never had a Medicare number, and I'm not going to get a Medicare number, because anytime I hear doctors say that, I ask them, do you treat Medicare patients? And they'll say, well, only a few. Like, well, each one is a $30,000 violation. So, that can add up pretty quickly if they get found out. So, just
totally.
Yeah.
Next question is, we had a doctor who recently went through a Medicare audit, and he went through with flying colors. And in fact, the response was, wow, we could use you as an example clinic.
Exactly.
So for other doctors.
Awesome.
So, Yeah. So, but it was really a lot of sleepless nights going through it for them. But what can a DC do to avoid a Medicare audit, if anything? And second question on that is, does keeping a small Medicare practice help protect you from having a Medicare audit?
Certainly the smaller the practice, the smaller the bullseye. You know, the bigger the practice, the bigger the bullseye, and that goes for auditing on everything. Now, there's no guarantee that that any doctor is not going to be audited, because audits are random. You know, the CERT audits with Medicare, which stand for Comprehensive Error Rate Testing, are audits that are done on a lottery. Okay, so basically, if it's, if they spin the wheel and it's your time, it's your time. You can be seeing 3 Medicare patients or 3,000 Medicare patients, and it doesn't matter. You're going to get audited. Those are just generally documentation audits, where Medicare is going to ask for 3 to 5 charts to see if your documentation is supporting the coding, and we don't have billing errors going on, and so on and so forth. A recovery audit contract audit, or a supplemental Medicare recovery audit through a company such as Strategic Health Solutions, and they're out there in force right now auditing chiropractors. You would know that because they're going to ask you for anywhere from 30 to 35 charts. And what they're going to do then is they're going to extrapolate an error rate of your Medicare claims, and then they take a 2 to 6 year look back period, and everything Medicare paid you within that period of time would be recouped. So, if your error rate on your documentation is 50%, then they would say 50% of everything we paid you over the last 2 years was an error, and we're going to take that back. And
Right.
so I do know that doctors, and again, this is not a hard and fast rule, but I do know that doctors who are non-par have a less likely chance of being hit with an audit. But any doctor can be audited, whether you're par or non-par. I have seen over my career that the non-par doctors are usually kind of left alone. And so unless they have billing problems in which the patients complain that they're not getting their money. But
Right.
a non-par doctor is getting the billing out for those Medicare patients, and the Medicare patients are getting their money reimbursed that they paid the doctor, then usually things are pretty good, and the non-par doctor is kind of left alone. But that is not a guarantee.
Certainly. Now, do non-par doctors, do they have to still do the electronic filing, or do they just give a super statement to the patient?
They have to file. So whether you're par or non-par, you still have to file. You just don't accept assignments. So essentially, you collect for the spinal manipulations up front. You collect for all the non-covered services, which is the extra spinal, the therapies, and so on up front. You tell the Medicare patient that you're going to bill Medicare, that Medicare is only going to reimburse them on the spinal manipulation code. And so essentially the patients pay you, you bill Medicare, and Medicare pays the patient.
Perfect. Last question. What are all the Medicare modifiers that we need to be aware of for chiropractors, and when or why do you need to use them? Kind of in a real quick snapshot
For
explanation.
spinal manipulations, if the patient is under active care, you would use an AT modifier. For spinal manipulations in which the patient has signed an ABN and now they're on maintenance care and they have chosen option 1, which is let's continue to bill Medicare, then you would remove the AT modifier and replace it with a GA modifier. So the GA modifier is for spinal manipulations, Medicare patients, option 1 on the ABN. Okay? The GY modifier is to be placed on all other service codes that are not covered by Medicare. And the GX modifier is used if you've had the patient sign a voluntary ABN. So if you've had the patient sign a voluntary ABN for, let's say, your rehab code, it would be 97110 GYGX. It would be a double modifier. And those are the only 4 modifiers you have to worry about for Medicare.
Perfect. Any other questions for any of the doctors on the line? Are the lines open?
Yep,
Lisa?
lines are open.
Or staff?
Feel free to email me with it if you have any private questions, or you want to reach me by phone. Feel free to call me. Best way to reach me is on my mobile, because I do travel quite a bit. So my mobile phone is my albatross that I keep with me at all times. And so if I don't answer, leave me a voicemail and I will call you back. So it was a real pleasure.
Do you want to chat your phone number and email into the chat box so we have that for the recording?
Sure.
That'll come across in the recording, correct?
Sure, you bet.
And also, and just to kind of promote Lisa and Gold Star a little bit here, thank you so much. This was wonderful. One of the most informative hour-long billing webinars I've ever listened to that you've done, or anybody else for that matter. So very, very good content and material here. Lisa does full billing services. If you don't have a billing department and you need to hire a billing department, I would look no further than Gold Star Medical. They are phenomenal. They're award-winning. Lisa already, she didn't really do herself, but I don't think justice by her intro she gave, but she's very good. She's very well known, and she can definitely handle more clientele. She also does webinar training specific to offices and live on-site trainings. If you want her to come out for a couple of days to your practice for a full day at a time or a couple of days, she has that available to you. So you can always reach out to her or us, and we'll refer you to her.
Thank you so much. And we just got it in the chat. Joel Dayton gave us some very valuable information that the transition time from par to non-par is between the 15th of November to the 31st of December. So he just checked on that yesterday. So anyway, that's good information to know. Well, if you don't have any other comments, Dr. Fenell, thank you so much for your great referral of me, and of course I had I do the same for my clients who are looking to specialize in the kind of work that you do, which I think is awesome, and I love to send them over to you guys as well. So
thank you so much, Lisa.
Continuing this, and let me know. I'm thinking that the next time we do meet, whenever that is, that I would love to talk to you guys about revenue streams for the Hand and Foot Clinic and how to bill and code for them so that you can get paid and be making some additional money. So all right,
perfect. That's exciting.
Talk to you soon, and God bless everybody.